Sophie comes across as a proper and very responsible person, but what this really hides is a fear of taking up space. She lives as if her presence were a nuisance, and this is closely related to her lack of self-esteem. In this video, we will understand the biggest problem in Sophie's life and know it's not the curse. The first important image of Sophie is routine. The film begins with Sophie sitting and working on some hats when they tell her that they are going to close the shop and go out for a walk. Sophie declines the invitation and they all leave. This whole scene is quite symbolic as she is sitting, trapped in a building full of hats, while there is a large window in front of her, as if that were her only contact with the outside world. Then we see Sophie getting ready to go out, and when she puts on her hat, she feels uncomfortable with her reflection and lowers the hat as if she wants to hide her face. Not only that, but when she goes outside, she does so stiffly and avoids everyone, reinforcing the idea that Sophie doesn't want anyone to see her. Sophie has built her identity around being correct. People like this tend to think, if I don't bother anyone, they won't reject me. When Howl appears and treats her as if she were important, as if she were someone, we see how Sophie becomes confused and even more stiff. This is a fairly common trait in people with low self-esteem, not wanting to take up space or be looked at. Because being the center of attention is uncomfortable for you. In a way, it's embarrassing, as you have a negative view of yourself. That is a literal lack of self-esteem or self-consideration. She avoids looking at other people because she feels like she's taking a test. And if you already believe that you don't measure up, your brain tries to avoid any situation where you might be exposed.
I knew I royally screwed up, and that I needed to pay for being a jerk. And so, I pushed everyone away.
When Hal leaves her with Letty, there is a quick scene that shows the greatest contrast in Sophie's self-image. She compares herself to her sister. Letty is blonde with blue eyes, something that represents that idealized beauty. The same thing happens with Howl. He is blonde to maintain the mask of the perfect person. But apart from Letty having the appearance of idealized beauty, you can see how all the men in the store are attracted to her sister. So Sophie, growing up with this comparison, tells herself that she is ugly, since she neither has the idealized appearance, nor does she get the attention of men. But is it that Letty gets the attention of men because she is pretty, or because she allows herself to be who she is and allows herself to be exposed? We all know that being blonde with blue eyes is not the only type of beauty that exists. In those early interactions with her environment, with her sister, with those in the hat shop, Sophie has a way of expressing herself that does not speak from a place of I want, but rather from a place of I have to. She is accepting a role, as if it were already decided that her destiny is to stay there, sewing hats, being the responsible daughter. This is a way of trying to find identity in work. Think about it this way. If you believe that you are not enough or that you should not take up space, your mind thinks that if you are effective and useful, at least you will not be a nuisance. That's why she's obsessed with her father's business, because it's the only way Sophie sees herself as enough. It's the only place where she believes she can exist without being a nuisance. So when the Witch of the Waste enters the hat shop and curses Sophie, that curse serves as a direct blow to her identity. Sophie's mentality is confirmed here, because Sophie already felt like she didn't fit in. The curse only makes that feeling visible. The moment Sophie becomes an old woman, she is confused, she feels fear, and then a strange kind of calm. Seeing herself as old, Sophie loses the weight of, I have to fit in. She's no longer competing in the social market of youth. She is no longer in that kind of constant examination that she imposed on herself. So Sophie decides to leave, and this narratively is the character's first adult act. She leaves to get away, not to burden her family, to disappear without causing problems. It's sad, but it's consistent with her mindset. If I leave, I won't bother anyone. But at the same time, it's a huge step for Sophie. For the first time, she takes action instead of getting stuck in a rut. It's not that Sophie has suddenly become brave, but she has started to move both mentally and physically, and that is already the first step towards maturity. Both on his journey through the wasteland and when she finally arrives and enters the castle, she doesn't apologize for existing. She sneaks in, speaks confidently, allows herself to be a little blunt, and even jokes with Markle's friend. It's funny, but it's quite important for Sophie. It's as if old age gave her permission to have character. I'm old now. What do you expect from me? The curse doesn't turn her into someone new. It simply removes the mask that kept her quiet. You can see it in the way she talks to Markle, how she opens the door to see how it works. These are things the old Sophie wouldn't have allowed herself to do. It's funny that this character is so powerful that even Calcifer obeys her. And when she proclaims herself the cleaner, it's simply her old mechanism coming to light. If I'm useful, they'll let me stay. That was always her way of surviving, turning her presence into service to justify her presence. As much as there is a change happening inside Sophie, like everything in life, the changes that really matter don't happen overnight. It's a process with ups and downs, which is why Sophie woke up old and has been old until now, because deep down she is still insecure. But the important thing is that we are already beginning to see the change. So cleaning becomes a way to give meaning to her stay in the castle. And in case anyone doesn't know, Sophie's curse is related to her internal state. If she is confident, she becomes younger. If she is insecure internally, she looks old. The part where this is clearly seen is when she is defending Howl in front of Suleiman. She becomes younger, but as soon as Suleiman says that Sophie is in love, she becomes old again. This happens several times throughout the film, but this is one of the clearest examples for me. And this is where I'm going to talk about her relationship with Howl. And the truth is that this film does a much better job than most romances. Neither Sophie nor Howl are saved by falling in love with each other, because Sophie isn't the only one going through an internal conflict. Howl comes in like the typical dream, handsome, mysterious, confident, with that I can do anything energy. He's the kind of person someone like Sophie could idealize in order to escape her own life. And who knows, she might have done so, but because of the curse, Sophie begins to see things differently. She admires him, but she doesn't make him her religion. From the castle, Sophie begins to see him as he is, brilliant and also evasive. The moment Howl sinks because of something superficial, the famous collapse of his image, the drama he makes when there's a problem with his hair dye, is when you really see that Howl lives behind a mask. His identity is built on how others see him. But I've already explained all this in a video I made talking only about Howl. If you're interested, don't worry, I'll leave the suggested video at the end of this video so you can watch it. But anyway, the point is that when Sophie sees this drama, she doesn't react with pity. She reacts in a very adult way, with patience, but also with clarity and integrity. She gets fed up and tells it like it is, even allowing herself to be exposed by saying that she was never beautiful. But she is still able to reconsider and act with empathy. She understands that this problem is not about her, it's about Howl, so she returns to the castle and helps him. When the subject of war comes up, we see how Howl is someone who is running away, lying, avoiding committing to anything that might trap him. Sophie lived small out of fear. He lives large out of fear. They are both running away, just in different disguises. The important thing is that Sophie doesn't cling to Howl to save her. She simply chooses him. And that is true love building itself. When Howl asks Sophie to go talk to Suleiman, despite the danger, Sophie agrees. The Sophie of the beginning avoids conflict and shrinks so as not to take up space. Agreeing to go with Suleiman is the opposite. She walks into the lion's den because she decides to. She is aware of the risk, but she goes because she chooses to, because it matters, and because she won't let the people she loves self-destruct without standing up to them. Before, her safety was routine. Going to the palace means walking to a place that is dangerous and unpredictable, and from there, Sophie begins to be able to navigate the uncertain. But on her way to the palace, Sophie encounters the Witch of the Waste, the one who put the curse on her. And although at first we see some resentment, when Sophie sees that the witch is having a hard time climbing the stairs and no guard is helping her, Sophie starts to cheer the witch on. Sophie helps her because she no longer lives in fear or revenge. She is not necessarily forgiving what was done to her. She is showing that her identity does not depend on having an enemy. Sophie sees a defeated woman and responds with humanity.
Sophie, やだよ。荒地の魔女だぜ。
もう大丈夫よ。
When Howl leaves her in charge of the ship to escape Suleiman, I find this part quite symbolic because for the first time, Sophie does not depend on Howl or anyone else to take the helm of her life. She is the one in charge. Now she is steering her own life, even though she is not entirely sure how the ship works. This reinforces what I said about Sophie learning to navigate uncertainty when she previously needed a safe route. At that moment, Sophie was almost 100% sure of herself. So much so that when she wakes up because Howl has arrived, she remains young. But there is still one last fear left to overcome, believing that she does not deserve love, even if she has no role to offer. When Sophie enters the room and Howl is transformed, this is a shock to Howl, as his greatest fear is to be seen as he really is. Howl is at his most vulnerable at that moment, and Sophie declares her love for him. But the important thing is that she doesn't say, "I love you" to the handsome and charming Howl. She says it to the scary Howl, and Howl leaves right after because that phrase disarms him. He is not ready to be loved without his mask, and Sophie was seeing too much. Even though it is not real rejection, Sophie experiences it as if it were, because her deep insecurity is, if I am not useful, pretty, or perfect, they will abandon me. She exposes herself emotionally, and the response is absence. The funny thing is that I didn't notice it when I made the Howl video, but in this one it became quite obvious to me that Howl casually appears with his natural hair color, black, the day after Sophie confessed her feelings to him. But anyway, when Howl fixes the castle and makes her a room, Sophie finally feels like she belongs there. But she doesn't feel like she deserves love, and not just from Howl. In this case, it's that love of wanting someone to be there just for the sake of their presence. Because she still doesn't feel like her mere presence is enough. And that's why when Howl shows her his secret garden, Sophie tells him she's afraid he'll leave. She also tells him she's ugly and the only thing she's good for is cleaning. Upon returning to the castle, Sophie runs into her stepmother, who tells her she's getting married to a rich man and that Sophie can finally come back. But Sophie rejects the invitation. It's as if she's rejecting all the values she stood for at the beginning of the film. When war comes to the city, it symbolizes the moment when the story ceases to be an emotional conflict and becomes external reality, crushing internal excuses. This forces Sophie to prioritize and ultimately break out of her invisible mode. Sophie becomes more determined because social fear pales in comparison to the real fear of losing her loved ones. When Sophie has a clear goal, her insecurity loses its power. War arrives, and suddenly Sophie stops wondering if she deserves to exist. She begins to act like someone who is indispensable, someone who, if she doesn't take action, could cost the lives of those she loves. When Howl finally declares his love, she no longer needs any internal proof. All she needs is to keep the people she loves. So much so that when Sophie takes Calcifer out of the castle, it collapses. Sophie had turned the castle into a home, but that scene proves that her home no longer depends on a place. You've probably heard the phrase that true home is where the people who love you are. And when Sophie gives her hair to Calcifer to move the castle, she's not just throwing her hair into the fire, she's throwing away the identity she had rooted in her. In movies, cutting your hair usually symbolizes closing a chapter. When Sophie travels to Howl's past, the movie shows you that she no longer lives looking out the window. Now she enters the unknown, and her presence leaves a mark. That's taking up space. Sophie really traveled to the past and talked to Howl, which is why at the beginning of the movie, Howl says this to her.
いやーごめんごめん探したよ
And then Sophie sees Howl completely broken and lost, and Sophie kisses him, and that brings him back to consciousness a little, but he is still missing the part that made Howl incomplete, his heart. Howl's heart is almost literally as if he had to tear something out of himself in order to survive. When Sophie returns it, Howl is no longer bound by a pact that fragments him and becomes a complete self again.
これはひどい体が石みたいだ
そうなの心って重いの
Howl is healed not because Sophie is perfect. Howl changes because he meets someone who does not idolize him. She sees him and she demands things of him, and Sophie is not saved because Howl loves her. Sophie is saved when she decides that she also deserves to be loved. And this is what makes this love story so real. I'll leave the video of Howl here for you to watch. It complements this video very well. And let me know what other Studio Ghibli film you recommend I analyze. This video of Sophie, the one of Denji, and many others came about thanks to your requests, so it's very important to me.